G'day Spurs fans, Paul Hotspur Hippie here, the only psychedelic soccer show on the internet, and not much news happening as usual, so I thought I'd have one of my meandering rambles and see how we end up. Let's talk about football, of course, and how I think that football is a real force of good in the world. It's something that ultimately has low stakes. It's not life and death or anything like that. But we've assigned or football fans rather have assigned importance to it. You know, it affects our moods. I know, well, I'll speak for myself. Whenever Spurs win, I'm happy. I'm 10 feet tall. I can take on the weak. When we lose, I'm a little bit down. And I find that kind of paradox that football ultimately has low stakes, but I make it important. I find that to be wonderfully human and very absurd, and it makes me giggle. So football, for me, is a funny old thing, and I try not to take it too seriously or get angry about it as much as possible. But generally, you know, football I think is a good thing for the people of the world. For me, football, or sport in general, I guess, for me is very similar to art. It is art. It's human beings expressing themselves in a infinite variety of different ways, and it shows us that we are more similar around the planet than different. And which is why I guess I think I'm not a big fan of politics in football or sport, you know, punishing or ostracising certain countries. Now generally when I say countries, I often tend to mean the governments or regimes, the ruling classes of each country, not the people, not the population. Because governments and regimes do a lot to keep us separated from each other. They'll stroke our egos on one hand and make us fearful on the other. So we get that dopamine hit for feeling, you know, superior, and then a bit frightened. And who's the antidote to our fear? Well, it's the government, isn't it? Countries often, and I'm sure I don't know of a country that doesn't do this. They'll try and portray their population as being something exceptional, superior, different. Little example, which is probably happening. You've probably heard something similar in your country. In Australia, when there's a natural disaster that occurs, which are frequent, it could be a hurricane, it could be an earthquake, it could be a flood, it could be a bushfire. And we quite often hear on the news that when people bandy together and help each other out, it gets called, oh well, that's the Australian spirit, isn't it? It's the Australian way. When the chips are down, we help each other out. And to me, there is a subtle implication in that countries outside of Australia, human beings living elsewhere on the planet, don't do the same, which is bonkers, isn't it? So it's a form of making you a little bit superior. We band together, they don't. And so there's a lot of conditioning and I'd go as far as to say brainwashing to keep us apart, because we are sponges. Our brains are complete sponges. I'm affected by it, you're affected by it, we're all affected by it. You know, when human beings are born, because we've got such big heads coming through such a small hole, our brains have got bugger all in it. Nothing, it's just nothing. You see a baby, it doesn't even know it's got arms and legs. You've got to wrap it to stop it scratching itself, they're that dumb. So we're little sponges, We are who we hang around with, And if you're hearing the same messages again and again and again, it's very powerful. Gets into your head, there's no stopping it. Makes me laugh when I hear people say things like, oh, adverts don't have any effect on me. Well, they do actually, otherwise I would be spending billions and trillions of dollars on it. The only way to have advertising not affect you is to just not watch it. So there's an awful lot of stuff going on in the world that keeps us separate. The idea that we're not one species, that some are better than others. You know, people have got very screwed up ideas about things like genetics, and there's dangerous nutcases out there like Jordan Peterson, who seems to think there's such a thing called evolutionary psychology, which has got absolutely no basis in scientific fact at all. It's a lie. The idea is that somehow we're born innately fearing snakes. It's just ridiculous. We're all scared of guns as well. Where have we learned that? Same way we learn we're scared of snakes. You learn it. Because like I say, when you're born, you're a blank slate. And the reason I bring up the nutball world of evolutionary psychology is because, just as they say we've evolved to have certain fears, there's also a very big implication there that, well, we've evolved to like to just hang around with our own, if you know what I mean. So, if you're out there and you're a bit of a bigot, or you have unreasonable prejudices, not only are you in the right, and they usually link these things with morals as well, but you've evolved to think that way. It's natural. Absolute arse. Like I say, we're born with barely a brain. Everything is learned, all our behaviour is learned. Our prejudices and biases are all learned. They're not innate. And where are they learned from? They're learned from society, our parents, our friends, everything. Everything around us we all absorb. We're little sponges. And so when that results in things like nationalism, you know, I'm not big on countries. They're good for sport, but that's about it. Nationalism, you know, I hear expressions like, oh, well, we don't want people coming over here because they don't understand the Australian way of life. You might have heard something, the American way of life, the British way of life. What the hell does that even bloody mean? Like someone living in Bondi has the same way of life as someone living in Ballarat, or someone living in Glasgow has the same way of life as someone living in Belfast, or Nuneaton, or Penzance. It's absolute garbage, 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 garbage. And so on to football. Football for me, as well as being absurd, because it's not important, yet it's very important at the same time, is just a little way of unlearning all that stuff. It's a positive influence at its best. At its best. I'm talking about at its best because there are always exceptions to the rule. But when you support football at a national level, you get to see people from all around the world. And what a surprise, they behave in very, very similar ways to the way you do. Whenever their team scores, you cheer. And whenever the other team scores, you're a bit miffed about it, you know? We all kind of react and behave in very similar ways. We've learned to appreciate football in a very similar way all around the planet. And it gives us a bit of a connection with each other. One of the big ways to for bigotry to end in the world is for us to be more connected with each other. It even happens with someone who's a big bigot. I've seen this many times in my life, where they won't like a particular sort of person because of either where they're born, what they look like, the sort of lifestyle they lead. But then they'll get to know one, maybe it's through work or something like that, and they'll make an exception. Yeah, I don't like that lot, but such and such is all right. And I don't think they sort of consider for a minute what they've just happened to meet the only decent one of that lot in the world. What a coincidence! I think not. It's because you've connected to someone at a human level, And maybe you should perhaps assume that the rest of that lot are like that as well, instead of you just got lucky. So when I see things like the World Cup and seeing people a lot of the time root for the underdog, it makes me smile. It makes me smile. It undoes some of that negative learning that we're confronted with from the day we're born. Something much more positive. And so that's the reason why I don't really like politics being involved with sport. So, you know, this country getting banned from that and this country getting banned from that. Because when you do that, you isolate people of that country even more, and that gives their regime a chance to say, look, everyone hates us. Everyone hates us even more. Now, of course, sometimes that doesn't go prettily when you've, you know, I'm not being super idealistic. You know, sometimes there can be things like crowd trouble, you know, stuff like that. But I still think that the benefits of us seeing each other as human beings at a football match, no matter who's in charge of the plot of dirt you live on, I think it far outweighs the negatives of far outweighs countries being ostracised and isolated through no fault of a football fan, but just because someone in a big chair somewhere has decided to make some pretty bad decisions, and a lot of the population have been tainted with those ideas. It opens up barriers between us towards them and them towards us. They get to see that, you know, okay, human beings, we all kind of have our own little flourishes on existence, but we're all pretty similar as well, because we are all the same. That's scientifically true. We all share the same genetic material. We might look a bit different, but that don't make us different. That's the way it goes, man. Anyway, I'll see how this one turns out. I hope you're all well out there. Tottenham are back to Tottenham. I've got to slip some Spurs in there. Tottenham are playing Cambridge United this weekend in a behind doors friendly. So there's a bit of action happening there, and I'm looking forward to seeing the result. Anyway, as always, peace and love, man. Peace and love, and come on, you Spurs.